let's go to the next talk. We will have Cory again moderating the next panel. And can someone please help me with 2 more chairs, if possible? Thank you so much, because we're going to talk about something super interesting, which is building technology at scale. So it's not about going from an idea, an MVP, to go-to-market strategy. It's not only scaling to more countries, to more people, but going global and reaching, I don't know, heights that you could never imagine. So, Cory?
So thanks again to Techsylvania for creating this event where everybody can come together. And I'm really grateful for what they've done and everybody that they bring together. There's a lot of really amazing people, including all of you, and the speakers, of course, right? So also, thanks for being here, and again, thanks for investing your time. So I'm sitting here with some of the key leadership team of Superbet, which is a pretty massive company, pretty global company. And I'm going to introduce them in a second, but first I just want to give you a little bit of an understanding of the profile of the company that they've helped to scale and have wonderful plans for. So it was founded, it's an entertainment technology company founded in 2008 by 2 brothers, one of whom was here before, about 30 minutes ago, Sasha Dragic, if you caught him, and his brother, Augusta. So their mission is to bring exciting, technology-powered entertainment in sports and gaming to millions of customers globally, and they've done just that. So they started like most companies, right? It's an individual, it's a small group of individuals who have an idea, a belief, and sort of unlimited passion. And the conversations I've had with these guys, even though they've scaled such that they have, I still felt that passion and that drive, which is really exciting. So today they're a team of 4,500. They've raised about 200 million from Blackstone, which is is the largest asset manager in the world, at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. They operate in 5 different countries and have team distributed across 12, right? So building a technology company at scale is incredibly difficult. And I'm grateful to have them here and to talk about building technology to scale. So each of them have decades of experience in a lot of different areas within a company, and the detail of their experience is on the website. Given the limited amount of time today, I'm just going to read their names, their role, and some of their key focus areas before we get into the content for you all. But I do want to say that they are super awesome, super fantastic, and will be super educational. Come on, man, that's a dad joke. Superbet, super. Need a marketing professional, Sasha? Okay, so let's introduce him. Josephine, to my right here, is the Chief Transformation Officer of Superbet Group. So her focus primarily is digital transformation, strategy, and growth. We have Sameen Jalal, Chief Technology Officer of Happening, which is part of the Superbet Group, right? And so his focus, of course, is tech innovation, leadership, and global scale, right? The load that guy's got to solve to is got to be crazy. We have Albert down at the end, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Superbet Group. And his focus is global expansion, innovation, and leadership, and I'm sure team and culture. And then Andrei is the Chief Product Officer with Happening, which again is part of Superbet. And his focus is, of course, product innovation, growth, strategic thinking. He probably dreams in user experience and stuff like that. Do you have a short temper when it comes to bad web design and product design? Yeah, yes, he does. Good. All right. So let's dive in here. First for Josephine and Albert, right, on either ends here. So when you've seen exponential growth, right? We talked about millions of users globally. So especially the last 5 to 6 years. So earlier Sasha talked about the growth sort of went like this and then has really spiked. So after the launch in Brazil, how do you guys think about the immediate future in terms of additional international markets? And what are the fundamentals then? So it's a two-part question. Where are you looking next and why? And then what are the fundamentals that you consider when determining where to go? And either of you can start.
Thanks, Cory. Can everyone hear me? So it might be worth starting with a bit of context and taking you back where Superbet began in 2008. It was a retail business only in Romania.
Wow.
It then expanded to online and expanded to different geographies. It's built its own proprietary technology. And today it has podium positions in Romania, in Poland, in Belgium, and on track to getting a podium position in Brazil, which is obviously a very large and competitive market.
Huge.
So that's where we started, that's where we are today. The way we got here, I think, sports-led proposition, proprietary technology, hyper-localized product and hyper-localized operations in the countries we went in. But I think most importantly, there was a lot of agility in the way we grew, in the way we made decisions, in the way we moved fast. And that, for me, was really the magic behind everything else. I just joined, 8 months ago, but I could see that magic even nowadays in the DNA of the business.
So moving that quickly, though, how did you not break too much?
Look, I think it's, as Sasha said, we're reinventing ourselves every 2 years. So we're actually breaking and all the time and reconstructing all the time. And look, our North Star, we're on a journey. Our North Star is to be, 30% market share in 30 countries. That's quite ambitious.
It is.
Based on where we are today. But I think everyone in the team is convinced that we're able to get there.
Love it.
But, without reinventing yourself, rethinking about processes or platform, how we want to scale, that's how we're going to get there. So
I really love that approach too, because if sort of part of your core culture is we are intentionally reinventing ourselves, I think that's very healthy, because a lot of companies will get stuck on, well, that's just the way it's done, right? That's who we are and what we do. And so I think that's a really healthy way to look at it. Albert, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's a couple of...
Mic isn't on. Yeah. Alley-oop.
I think as we go to the next phase, right? I mean, we've had good success so far, but to Josephine's point, we're fairly convinced that the biggest growth trajectory is to follow. I think for me, there's a couple of things we continue to debate and explore. One is how, as we grow to the next phase, what kind of operating routines and processes we need to put in place that are the absolute minimum we need for the next stage of growth. So, even as, I look at operations, I'm very intentional in not over-processing the company in a way, or over-standardizing the company. It needs to be the least amount necessary at every stage of growth. And then the other point is, as we grow, how do we grow without a proportional increase in resources that we have to deploy in every single point? Where is the synergy where we get in that stage of growth, in that phase of growth? And what will influence this will also be where we go next, right? And that's a constant discussion we have as well. Do we go for the markets that are the biggest prize out there, the biggest opportunity? Or, to Sasha's point in some of the earlier sessions, we buy our independence. So we grow for markets where we know we have a stronger likelihood to win early on, and from that build the muscle and then go for the bigger items. So those are dimensions that we will continue to explore over the next period.
So as you guys think about that expansion, how important is the geographical proximity or adjacency as you're growing? Is there anything like that matters?
Yeah, look, it's less about the proximity. It's more about where there's opportunity. And opportunity can come in various different shapes. It can be good product market fit. It could be some level of disruption in a market. It could be some, something, is happening in the market that, we know of and some relationship that we have and so on. So it comes in different shapes. And it's about only like really hyper focus on markets where we really know we're going to have a good chance to get to podium position. So it's not a spray and pray type of strategy, but the
totally.
exact opposite.
Yeah. And what's the general distribution of online versus retail now?
Majority of our business is online.
Yeah, I think.
Sasha spoke earlier about the retail network we retain in Romania, and then we have also a retail presence in Belgium. So we do continue to have that as a core part of the business, and there's always an examination of, do we have a long-term multi-channel play? Do we have a long-term play with retail as a marketing avenue, as flagship locations, or is a channel that will eventually fade out? So at this point, online is the majority of the business. Retail is still a meaningful component. I think where the future lies, we're still going to land on the POV. We're also going to be shaped of what the market and the customers tell us for the next phase.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thanks. Do either of you two have anything to add? It's Josephine's. Okay, so Andrei, this one's for you. When you look at the product roadmap that you've invariably helped create, how are you seeing the product portfolio developing in the next couple of years? So for example, is it, call it more gamification, more content, more community, all of the above? Is it something I didn't mention? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think for us, especially in a scale up, more so in a startup, it's very tempting to just build and ship stuff and put stuff in front of customers. That's usually a really good approach. But for us, as we became bigger, the complexity increased, and we had to become much more intentional about what's our product strategy. And I think Sasha is also modeling all the time this, thinking ahead. How do we make sure we understand what's coming next? How are we always prepared for the next disruption? Mm-hmm. So if you think about this, we basically said, okay, from a product point of view, we had, like maybe 2 years ago, we had a list of features that we were constantly building. I think we've pivoted somewhat to say, what's our product strategy? What are the things that we want to stand for and that we want our customers to think about when they think about us and experience with us? And hopefully those things are also margin drivers, they're expansion drivers, they're hard to replicate by our competitors. And this formed the basis of our product strategy. We're talking about 7 pillars to give you a sense of what those are. Trust is one pillar. Value is another pillar, personalization is another pillar. And I think, with this in place, that allowed us to say, well, what do we want to then do in 2025? And what are the building blocks we need to be working on in a very intentional manner that helps us build towards that longer-term strategy? And with this in mind, we said, okay, what's the investment that we need? And with this investment, we essentially said, okay, how are we going to deploy it? And then what's the product roadmap for 2025, which we have a quarterly kind of rhythm now that we revise and we update. So I think the point is we moved from a let's build, let's add these features to how are we really intentional about making sure whatever we build is coherent to the users. And it's almost like 1 + 1 = 3 in the long term.
I love that. So I'm assuming, too, you're watching the user behavior and how they interact with different elements and products and stuff like that. There's, I guess, 2 potentially different approaches, and one is more consistent with an enterprise, and one is more consistent with consumer. And that one, I think Steve Jobs sort of led the philosophy on that is we're going to tell people what they want and need, but there's also that approach of engaging with your users, whether it's not just watching what they're doing, but trying to suss out what they want, right?
Yeah.
And so do you guys participate in that sort of thing as well, through your product managers, through focus groups, or how do you know what in, I don't know, the US would want from Superbet?
Yeah, I think you need to do all those things, right? And obviously different product domains require different thinking. Some product domains might be much more straightforward, and you can understand what you need to build largely from looking at quantitative data across customer behavior, on-site behavior, and so on. Some other areas might be a bit more instinct-driven. We have a social network. That's not an obvious thing that we built, right? Like, if you think about our competitors, none of them have a social network, yet it works very well, and it's something we're going to continue to invest in. That social network, in order to build properly, you need to be much more opinionated on what the user wants, because you can't really ask them very clearly, what do you want from a kind of sports-focused, betting first kind of social network, right? So you need to mix and match those things, and we have largely three big things we're doing almost all the time. One is, just looking at the data from a qualitative point of view, from a quantitative point of view, looking at all the kind of telemetry we have on site and understanding what the users do. The second thing is research, so really kind of qualitative focus groups you mentioned, Cory, and kind of even individually speaking to users to understand what they prefer, what their motivations are. And really the third thing is just experimenting, because when you can't do either, you just experiment and see what works. And I think we're thinking much more about how do we build the infrastructure to experiment at scale, so that you're much less reliant on one and two. Not that it's wrong, but sometimes those two things can't tell you the right answer.
Yeah.
And there's also, I would say, the fourth pillar that we currently rely on, which is our local teams, right? Per Josephine's point earlier, we operate with a hyper-localized operation, and we have teams on the ground that, in addition to the structured research, we are always constantly feeding the voice of the market, the voice of the customer in a more informal, less structured way. Now, that's phenomenally insight. At times, it also comes with operational pain of how do you incorporate that spontaneous feedback into a structured process of getting that insight. But it is, nonetheless, a highly valuable channel.
Love it.
Maybe to add, one obvious but sort of non-obvious insight is around how do you get that better understanding of the user, so you know which way to go from a product strategy perspective or experimentation perspective. There's the qualitative and quantitative insights, but to bring that all together, we have started to think about data as a product within the organization itself. So less of we are going to immediately get the data to make the decision on the customer, but how do you make the individual decision makers within the organization much more effective through much richer data sets that they can tap into while we think about experimentation or figuring out which way the customer wants to go on the product. So data is really key in this whole equation.
Yeah, fantastic. So since you're speaking, we've got one for you. So there's only a few companies in your space that have their own sort of user platform, right? And you guys have built one. How do you feel, I guess, what are the advantages of having done that? Conversely, what are the challenges of having done that?
Yeah, definitely. I think Sasha referred to this a little bit earlier, but many of the other operators in the space did not own the entire end-to-end product stack or the technology stack in the space. So what used to happen is there was a third-party platform, and on that third-party platform, you'd build a website or the mobile apps and operate the business along this route. But of course, if you're using a third-party platform, any individual incremental innovation that happens on the platform, every one of the other operators that are using the platform also gets the same thing. Or you don't necessarily control all your costs end-to-end, so it could be a little bit more inefficient. And from an innovation perspective, and from a data, user understanding and data gathering perspective, you now have a unique insight that many of your operators wouldn't. So I think this is slightly before my time. I joined in 2022, but Sasha made a big decision to try to own our entire tech stack and undercut some of the platform capabilities that we were kind of outsourcing. And we've started to build that. We've built that platform. We've deployed it in a couple of the markets that Josephine is referring to, and we're getting a much better insight into what customers want, and we're able to innovate on the product in a way that our competitors in that market are not able to. So it's a huge competitive advantage for us on the path to being a tech-first company. And one of the maybe unintended consequences is engineers just love working on entire end-to-end stack, and owning that entire technology playground more or less has been a really big talent attractor. Hence, where we've gotten some pretty big, big talents from the industry.
When you guys migrated from that third party to your own, did you notice any difference in user behavior at all? Was there more engagement, longer session times, any of that type of stuff?
Yeah,
more
definitely.
reg conversion?
Definitely, I can bring Andrei into this as well. But we're still in the process of migrating most of our markets, or some of our markets, back onto the platform. But in some of the markets, let's say, namely in Belgium, when we migrated onto the platform, it was around the same time Belgium introduced an advertisement ban, where you would have had way less clarity in terms of what users wanted, or much a smaller funnel in terms of product acquisition. But using our core platform, we're able to innovate a lot more into new product experiences that drive engagement forward through loyalty and gamification, that now our platform actually enables us to innovate much faster along those routes. So we have now competed in Belgium where most other operators competed positively in Belgium, where most other competitors kind of lost market share in that same time when they lost a huge vehicle for growth themselves.
Interesting.
And I think we've seen, I think what Sameen is referring to is almost the medium to long-term consequences, right? If you control your destiny, you can be much more, opinionated about what you build. You have more freedom. I think even when we migrated, I think we've seen just a 10%, literally off the bat, 10% bump in most kind of core engagement metrics.
That's huge.
Right. So yeah, and it's partially driven because we also had new experiences that we offered out of the box. That's the beauty of a global platform, right? You can, when you see stuff, to Albert's point, you see stuff that works in a market, you then can easily scale it across other markets. And in some markets it might works, in some it might not, but the marginal cost is very low for us to do that across.
And going back to initial question on scaling internationally, having your own platform is a huge advantage as well, obviously.
Yeah.
One, you're able to localize versus, your competitors have great technology as well, great user experience, but you're able to localize it and you're able to react the fastest to regulatory changes. So we are in an environment where regulations can change overnight, The business who's able to tackle that change immediately is going to be the one that wins on the long term.
In terms of risks, where the platform, it seems like a pretty clear decision to want to own your own destiny in this case and own the entire tech platform, but it's not easy to do, right?
Yeah.
In our case, we have our highest peaks during the Saturday night football or Sunday football, which are off peaks for most people during work hours, and we could offload a lot of those scaling concerns to our third-party platform in the past. To try to in-house all of that complexity and talent took a pretty big uplift for us to get to, and did take quite a while before we're comfortable getting to the point where we're better, or we're at pace, or even better than our third-party platforms that we displaced. So it's been a pretty big journey even to get here, but it, of course, incurs more cost and risk on the path.
And ever evolving, and to your point with regulation, but also the different cultures. And what about localization? Is that a challenge as you expand into different markets? Do you have separate tenants per country?
We try to build with, I think what Josephine is mentioning, we have economies of scale now as well on the platform. So we don't try to have different tenants that are deployed to different countries, except for the pieces that are required from a regulatory perspective.
Sure.
So most of the users are using the exact same platform from one country to the other, and what that gives you is a lot of one, cost benefits, as well as understanding benefits. So if a user in a certain profile is, let's say, a Belgian user who has a certain profile, could be very similar to a Polish or Romanian user, but perhaps in different segments if you had to use multiple tenants. So all using a multi-tenant system where every user is on the same platform, we're able to get much better understanding of users and magnify kind of the engagement model in this case.
Makes loads of sense. Thank you. All right, Sameen, one more, if you don't mind. So I guess what can you share about the platform? And you've talked to some degree about that through this last, but what can you share about that as it relates to sort of the next 12 to 24 months as you think about it from a scale perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, because good technology takes time to build, and in a world we find ourselves in with a lot of regulatory change or opportunities, as Josephine was mentioning, or having to reinvent ourselves every 2 years, that Sasha was mentioning, it's difficult to figure out how to build and compose a platform that enables such nimble, agile reaction or proactive development on a product. So there's a couple of things we look at. One principle is we try to build a platform that's a component of it's a composite of many components. So it's a Lego brick platform, more or less, with different components that could be iterated on independently by either different teams, or 1 + 1 = 3 here of 2 different components of the platform coming in and making a much better whole. So we try to think really deeply about the architecture, and almost everyone in the company, we have architecture reviews, and we collaborate quite heavily in making sure that the use cases are quite well defined before we actually build those components. So the architecture needs to enable scale, of course, cost effectiveness, innovation in being able to compose of these platforms and products together, and then being able to, let's say, localize independently in a certain market. It often takes sometimes even longer to think about some of these components, because if we want to build a certain component for, let's say, Brazil and geolocating, as a requirement, we also want to make sure that component is usable in other markets if that requirement comes up in other markets. So we think quite deeply about each of these components, but because it's such a focused concern, it allows us to iterate independently and in parallel across our bigger engineering team.
Nice. So for you two, and jump in, of course, but so everyone's talking about AI, and they have been for now 3 years. It's going to eat the world, it's going to eat us, it's going to replace relationships, et cetera. On the negative side, it's going to create all kinds of efficiencies, it's going to create more power, it's going to create more opportunity. On the positive side, how do you all think about AI as it relates to not only your tech stack, but how I, a user, might interact with you and your product, as well as how internal team operates? Just talk a little bit about AI from those sort of multifaceted perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty exciting kind of set of plans baking in the background. As you said, AI is a massive platform shift that the industry is starting to put its hands around, and it's starting to already show it's paying dividends in quite a few different parts of the industry. Luckily, we're in an industry where if you don't own your own tech stack, you don't necessarily own your own destiny on the deployment of machine learning as well, or unilateral understanding of the user that enables us to fine-tune machine learning use cases to our customers. So we're thinking about it across a couple of different ways, but let's say one of them, we heard a little bit in the past talk, understanding our users is one of the key aspects. So if you have a very clear and nuanced understanding of a user, we can go from the exact same product experience across the board for every single person, across the millions of users we have, to a product that's tailored to each individual person in the most composable type of way, which is where we're headed. So something around personalization is one of the big areas, and Andrei's team has starting to build quite a few of these plans around how do you personalize the product. Second is around maybe the operational workflows. So how do you gain these process efficiencies without introducing too much overhead and starting to do automation and productization of many of the operational workflows that inevitably come up as your company scales and globalizes and gets much bigger. And this is one I think Josephine and Albert their teams are more or less working on. And the third, which is my team's focusing on quite a bit these days, is around engineering AI tools and augmentation of engineering capabilities. This is from both authoring code to testing code to actually deploying and making sure this large, complex system that we've now built actually is something maintainable and continues to scale in this kind of very nimble way that we're looking at. But AI is, of course, a huge thing we have to lean into, and with all of the other challenges, it's going to be a pretty big game changer if we're able to be a leader in the space rather than a follower, or if we just miss the trend altogether.
That's good. I think one of the things we still need to figure out how to do, and I think we're not the only ones, I think every company is asking themselves that question, to get the kind of program that Sameen described and really embed AI across the board, is how do we keep pace, how do you keep track of all the developments and all of the solutions that come up on weekly basis? I have this worry that we could get stuck in a state of perennial piloting, because we want to run pilots and test things out. And if you run a pilot and the solution is not great or the result is bad, then the answer is easy, you don't use it. But I think what we see happen is that you run a test, a pilot, the result is great, but by the time you finish the pilot, there's 3 other solutions in the market that have come up that might do the same use case better. So then the question is, should we go for another pilot of the newer solutions? And that's a bit the risk of this perennial piloting. So I think there's moments when we need to take a bit of stance and say, we've tried something, now let's really deploy at scale in the company and get better synergies out of it.
Just one more thing I wanted to add, because Sameen talked about user experience, talked about productivity in terms of development, but also talked about operational efficiency. And I think this is the one that's a bit more, I think, boring in some cases, but it's really, really important. If you think about the finance function, the HR function, all the operations, you know, a lot of them are working without any standardized processes in a very old school way. So how do you leapfrog that situation and use AI to, you know, become, you know, significantly more productive? And that's also going to help in terms of scaling up the business internationally. So there's the boring stuff, the exciting stuff. I think it's across the board.
Well, and the boring stuff maps to margins and right efficiency and work product and all of that sort of thing as well. Oh, we're red. Darn it, I had more questions. But thank you very much, you all, for being here. Thanks for what you've shared. I think it's been super, super interesting. And I'm glad all of you came as well. Let's give them all a huge round of applause. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, sir.